For the Democrats, what is clear-cut is they opened our borders, they brought in every kind of person on the face of the earth into this country, including the worst of the worst, because their goal is to change America. If that means a little bit of despotism and crime, and a little bit of raping and murdering, and people dying from drugs, so be it. The goal is one-party rule by the Democrat Party. Just like in communist regimes, the powerful person is the general secretary of the party. That's the person who de facto runs the country. Well, consider it the same way with the Democrat Party. The head of the Democrat Party. Due process. Due process. I love to hear the media and the Democrats, academia, and the other reprobates out there talk about due process for the most loathsome types of subhumans. This is our Constitution. This is our system. This is, and they lecture and they go on and on and on. Except when Donald Trump was in that star chamber of a courtroom, so-called, in Manhattan. He was denied due process repeatedly. He didn't even know exactly what he was being charged with. He didn't know exactly what the instructions to the jury would be. Due process, America, except when it applies to Donald Trump, then there is no due process. But if you're a multi-time wife beater, MS-13 member, human trafficker, like this guy Garcia that the Democrats, circled around, due process. If you're hundreds of Venezuelan gang members, terrorists, sent here by Maduro, the Marxist genocidal maniac in Venezuela, due process. And they throw this phrase around. Of course, they don't know what they're talking about, but it doesn't matter. It catches on. Yeah, due process. You even have conservatives. Yeah, due process. Legal analysts writing. Due process, due process. Well, what do they mean? I did an entire show on this on Fox. What is meant by due process? Of course, for the first 100 years or so in our country, there was no such thing as due process for illegal immigrants. Out the door they went. Even in the 1950s, when Dwight Eisenhower initiated, not my phrase, his, Operation Wetback, and removed over 1 million people from the United States, wasn't a whole lot of due process. And in many instances today, due process does not apply in the sense that it is understood. You see, the left and the Democrats, they're good at repetition and sloganeering, propaganda from their demagogues who are dressed up as journalists, and the guests they bring on these Sunday shows. What do they mean by this? Well, there are Supreme Court decisions that provide us with some guidance, but they're all over the map. The Supreme Court hasn't decided what it means either, depending on the category of the individual. Have they been here a long time? Did they just get here? Were they 25 yards from the border? All these things have been taken into consideration by the court to say yes, 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 no, maybe so. So it's not clear-cut, but for the Democrats, what is clear-cut is they opened our borders, they brought in every kind of person on the face of the earth into this country, including the worst of the worst, because their goal is to change America. If that means a little bit of despotism and crime, and a little bit of raping and murdering, and people dying from drugs, so be it. The goal is one-party rule by the Democrat Party. Just like in communist regimes, the powerful person is the general secretary of the party. That's the person who de facto runs the country. Well, consider it the same way with the Democrat Party. The head of the Democrat Party will have all this power. That's what they want. That's why they attack the independence of the Supreme Court, not the rogue judges who are delivering for the Democrat Party the constitutional construct that involves the judiciary. That they attack. And the individuals on the courts who are trying to defend it by doing their actual job. That's why they want to nationalize the voting system and turn it into one big California where they can never lose, and they continue to work on that, and on and on and on. So they want power. They are power hungry. That's what it's about. Power, as we discuss all the time. That's the central thing. Not rights, not liberty, not voting, not any of the rest of it. They will support whatever gives them power. And they will take two sides of the same issue, depending on if it takes power. I'm waving around the Constitution. We have constitutional rights. At the same time, they're telling us, oh, no. The Constitution was written by a bunch of white slavers. Ignore it. One of their mouthpieces at the nation, he goes on, he says, any law passed before 1965 should be rejected. The idiot. What about the 1964 Civil Rights Act? What about the 14th Amendment? equal protection, due process. What about the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery? Nothing that was passed before 1965. Schmuck. All right. So, due process. So for the Democrats, they let in probably 15 to 20 million illegal aliens. So many we can't even keep track of them. And they brought them in by plane, train. They brought them in by boat. They brought them in over land. They brought them in as fast as they could. Rubber stamping, bring them in. They gave them apps. They gave them, it's just incredible what was done to our country. They said the border was secure until it wasn't secure. Then they said that's because of Trump and the Republicans and the Senate and bipartisan legislation. And you see Donald Trump has shut down the border. I mean, it's shut solid down. So they lied. What's this all about? It's what I've said from day one, and for which I was attacked because I said it first. It's about changing America. It is about reshaping America, the phrase used in the New York Times. It is about altering the citizenry so the citizenry supports the Democrat Party. It's not about what's in the best interest of the American people, which is the original purpose of immigration, not the best interest of the Democrat Party. They don't care all the sex slavery that's taken place with women, all the abuse of women, all the abuse of children, all the sex slavery that children have been sold into, hundreds of thousands of missing, unaccompanied children. Oh, well, you know, as Stalin would say, you know, it wasn't Stalin actually, it was Durante who wrote for the New York Times. What did he say? Well, sometimes you got to scramble an egg, crack an egg in order to get what you need. It just, sometimes it happens. And so it happens. And so now they're worried about due process rights. They're not. They figured due process, full citizen-type due process under the 5th and 14th Amendments, that will ensure that we never deport the vast majority of these tens of millions of illegal aliens who are here, because it's an impossibility. It would overwhelm our court system and overwhelm our system. And a lot of these judges are trying to deliver for the Democrat Party because they were appointed purposely by Biden and Obama with the help of Schumer, who said, look, we put 235 progressives on the court to thwart Trump, and that's exactly what they're trying to do. So this is called judicial despotism, judicial tyranny. I've talked about it, I've written about it, and I intend to talk more about it, and I've written more about it, as you'll find out soon. There are different kinds of despotism, but despotism is despotism. Tyranny is tyranny. It could be one dictator, a monarch, or just a fascist. It could be a legislative dictatorship. We've seen that too. And you can have a judicial dictatorship, which is what is happening right now in our country. It goes back and forth depending on what the Democrats control. If they control the presidency, then they use it as a dictatorship under FDR and Woodrow Wilson and so forth. If they control the courts, like they do the lower court system, then they use that as a despotic tool and so forth. So that is exactly what's taking place here. So this issue of due process, as I said, I did a whole show on this on Fox. I've talked about it here constantly. What does it mean? Well, do we get help from the Supreme Court? Not a lot. The Supreme Court, you see, is setting policy. Because due process for illegal aliens, let alone aliens, really isn't in the Constitution. It says people, but we know what they meant by people. They meant you. And so they're coming up with different policies and then trying to constitutionalize them. Depends if you're 25 yards from the beach that you came in on or the border. Depends how long you've been here. It depends on this, it depends on that, it depends on this factor and that factor. You would think such a fundamental right, as they explain to us, of due process would be pretty clear, pretty simple, pretty understandable, but it's not. And so what the Democrats are trying to convince you to do and trying to pressure or convince you to support is the broadest possible due process rights for whoever is brought in here or comes in here illegally, which will mean they're here forever because we cannot possibly handle that load. We can't. Remember Cloward and Pivens, two Marxist professors who talked about overloading the welfare system by putting as many people as we could on it to collapse it. Well, they've overloaded the immigration system to put as many people into this country illegally as they can to collapse it. And so the Democrats are circling back because Trump wants to deport them and say, wait a minute, due process. And they have their courts behind them. And God forbid if the Supreme Court joins them, and it might, because it's a weak court. It's not a 6-3 conservative court. You've got two utterly reliable constitutionalists in Alito and Thomas. You have two usually reliable in Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. And then you have Barrett and Hollywood John, the Chief Justice. Boy, do we miss Rehnquist and Scalia, don't we?
For all this and much more, sign up for Levin TV.